Welcome to Roundtable, a community-focused initiative of Titan Radio and the faculty and students of the Broadcast Communication program at Westminster College. You're an important part of this dialogue. As you listen today, send us your thoughts on this show or ideas for future shows by calling our newsline at 724-946-6397. Send us a direct comment using the shout-out feature on the free Titan Radio mobile app. Email us at titanradio@westminster.edu or drop us a comment on our Facebook, Twitter, X, or Instagram pages. And now, here's today's discussion on Roundtable.
Welcome back to Roundtable. My name is Vivian Eader, and today I'm joined with Westminster's Dr. Timothy Grieve-Carlson, Assistant Professor in the Department of Religion and Philosophy. Welcome.
Thank you, Vivian. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Today we'll be discussing Dr. Grieve-Carlson's research and the book that he wrote. So super exciting stuff to talk about. But first, let's get to know you. What's your education background?
Yes, well, so my whole education background, I went to Anvil Elementary School, Anvil Cleona School District in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. I did my undergrad degree at a little school in New Jersey called Drew University, DREW, and I went there because I wanted to major in religious studies, and they had a really good religious studies department, and they also had a really good theological school attached to it. And when I got there, I really got into anthropology, which was a different discipline and a whole different major and different professors. So I got really into that, and I ended up majoring in anthropology and religion. And so yeah, I took a class that just sort of on a whim because it sounded interesting, and it really ended up shaping my life quite a lot, doing anthropology at Drew. And then I graduated from Drew, and I worked for a while, and then I went straight into a PhD program in religion at a school called Rice University in Houston, Texas. And I did my master's on my way to my PhD. And I started in 2016, and I graduated with the PhD in 2021.
And how did you come to Westminster? What was your journey here?
Yeah, so, well, the short version of my journey here is someone posted a job opening and I applied to it. But I actually did have a little bit of a background in Westminster because my advisor at Rice, a guy named Jeffrey Kripal, was a professor of religion here at Westminster in the 90s, so a really long time ago. So when I applied to the job, I wrote to Jeff and I said, I'm applying at, the old place he used to work, and he was really excited. And so he actually knew some of the people I work with now. So we did have I did have a little bit of a connection.
Full circle.
It is kind of full circle. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So yeah, I just applied to the job and it all kind of worked out.
What did Westminster have that you were maybe drawn to?
I think the thing that I was most drawn to was when I got here, it was a day a lot like today.
Mhm.
It was February. It was really cold. And but it was, Westminster is a cool little small town where everybody is sort of everybody's saying hello to each other, spending time together. And I just immediately got the impression that this was a place where just kind of FaceTime mattered. You know what I mean? Everyone kind of knows each other. Everyone is kind of happy to spend time together and see each other. And I really loved Rice and a lot of the big institutions I was at. I forgot to mention that between Rice and Westminster, I had a fellowship for a year at Penn in Philadelphia, and that's another really big school. But something I really liked about Westminster is that when I walk across campus, I see a ton of people I know, and it's just sort of a small town in that way. So I really like that part of it.
And what classes do you teach here?
I teach lots of classes. I honestly don't think I could list them all. Intro to World Religions, and okay, maybe I can try. Intro to World Religions, Intro to Philosophy, Inquiry, Understanding the Bible, Religion and Art, Religion and Science, Ancient Philosophy, Modern Philosophy. I taught a cluster last year with Dr. Bob Craven that was really fun called Appalachian Environmentalism. Yeah.
Because my intro to Dr. Grieve-Carlson is that I took the Intro to World Religions class because Westminster's special in the way where you have to take like a religion or philosophy like requirement.
Right.
And I was nervous. I was so nervous because I was like, I don't know much about religion.
Really?
Like the,
Why were you nervous?
I don't. There was something about like I didn't really know much about it, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be stupid. And man, it was honestly, I'm not even just saying this. It was one of my favorite classes I've taken at
Oh,
Westminster.
cool.
Like it was so interesting just to like learn. It sounds so stupid. Learn so much that I just like didn't even know like
No, totally.
existed.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really glad you liked it, Vivian. It was great to have you in the class. Um, no, I know exactly what you mean. That's excuse me, and that's kind of why I do what I do. Like, it's honestly thrilling to like learn about. It sounds silly, but like just to learn about other people and to learn about stuff that also like sometimes we can feel a little bit like you said, like maybe like awkward asking about or wondering about, right?
Mhm.
Like, what? Well, why do people who are different from me believe in this sort of thing, or why do people do this or people do that? And yeah, it's a really fun class to teach, and I'm glad that it was a fun class for you to be in. And yeah, human beings are just like weird and interesting, and that's like a great way to learn about them.
Tell me like about your research. Like what? How did it start? What is it? Just tell me everything.
Like sometimes some scholars, when you ask them this question, they can give you a really really specific answer. Like I really admire my colleagues like Dr. Matteo Luisi and Dr. Eric Fields. And when you ask Dr. Luisi what does he research, he's like galaxy formation, dot dot dot. And Dr. Eric Fields is like social memory, social emotional memory, right? And I'm sure that it's a lot broader than that. But so the sort of like simple version of what I research is like I'm really interested in the ways that environmental phenomena shape religious belief and behavior. So I'll like explain that in a little bit more detail. When I first got to Drew, like
Mhm.
the school where I was an undergraduate at, I signed up for a class my fall semester freshman year called Cultural Ecology, and I didn't know what that was. I honestly just thought the words sounded cool when you put them together. And it was a class basically about the way that like human cultures adapt to their ecological environments. And it was an anthropology class. And the guy who taught it was a guy named Mark Boyoli, who, shout out to Mark Boyoli, he ended up becoming my undergraduate advisor. I became his research assistant. I did field work with him in Wyoming, and I became really close with his family, and I just became like really like mentored by this guy. But one of the things that initially interested me about him was when he answered this question, what is your research on? He did research on rural white Americans. And so as like a rural white American, I was like, what are you talking about? You can do research on me, right?
Mhm.
But he did, and he did like his field site, the place where he actually did research was at hunting camps in Vermont. So he would spend time with people at hunting camps in Vermont and sort of do research on kind of like the ways that they sort of like related to their environment. But when we were in Wyoming together, we did research on the gas industry. So the ways that like people think about oil and gas extraction in the American West. And so none of this was like religious stuff, but I've always been really interested in like the way that people relate to their environments, like capital E, right? So not necessarily like what's your favorite animal, right? But how do you sort of like see yourself in your world, and how do you see yourself like as an actor in your world, right? And I also, in addition to that interest in relationships and people's, in environments and people's relationships with them, I've always been pretty interested in religion. I actually grew up in a place a lot like New Wilmington, and a lot of the people around me when I was growing up were really, really religious in a way that my family wasn't really.
Mhm.
And so I knew that religion was like really important, but I often did kind of like struggle to understand it. And especially in really even simple ways, like I struggled to understand like the feelings and motivations of my close friends when it came to religion. It just was just sort of strange to me. And I can honestly, I have a pretty definitive memory of when this happened. Excuse me. I was in high school and I read a novel where one of the characters was a scholar of ancient Chinese religious poetry. And I was like 15 years old, and I just sort of realized that it was possible to be a scholar of ancient Chinese religious poetry. And I was like, okay, I don't know what you have to do that, but that I'm going to try to do that. I don't know anything else, but that seems like something I should try to do. And so, yeah, that's why when I decided to go to Drew, I knew I wanted to major in religion because I just wanted to understand this thing. And so and when I got to Drew, I developed this sort of like intellectual interest in people's relationships with their environments. So that's kind of the background. When I graduated from Drew, I should also add that when I was at Drew, another thing that really bonded me with this guy, Mark Boyoli, was I was very interested in, I'll just call it like weirdo stuff, like ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, all kinds of like spooky stuff. And I asked Mark if he would let me do an independent study about Bigfoot. And he was like, yeah, sure. Just like keep it like scholarly. And I was like, okay. So I wrote this independent study turned into an honors thesis. And so that's another thing. I was not a good student before I got to college and like started working on stuff that kind of interested me. I'm actually kind of lazy and dumb. But once I started like working on stuff that I was interested in, I found it like really motivating. And so I ended up, unbelievably, like in a very unlikely way, I graduated with honors with this Bigfoot thesis. And I worked for a long time. I knew I kind of wanted to go to grad school, but I had no clue what I actually wanted to do. And there was this guy at Rice named Jeff Kripal who was writing kind of like scholarly intellectual books about the history of religions. But one thing that really made him stand out to me was he took paranormal stuff really seriously as an intellectual. And I just sort of decided that if I was going to do a PhD, it was going to be with him. And that's what happened. And so I got to Rice and I wrote this book that just came out. It's called American Aurora, and it's about the religious and kind of environmental history of Pennsylvania and this particular guy in Pennsylvania, this legendary figure named Johannes Kelpius. So once I was at Rice, like all of my interests could kind of come together. And the cool thing about doing a PhD is that you really have carte blanche to work on exactly what you're interested in. And for me, that's really what it was. It was like they paid me a very small amount, but they did pay me and basically gave me resources to do research and left me alone. And that was pretty cool. Yeah. And so yeah, I wrote this book about this figure, Johannes Kelpius, who was kind of like a legendary like hermit mystic who lived outside what is now Philadelphia. And I had to learn some languages, and I translated a lot of his writing and really tried to like understand him in his social context. And another thing that really interested me about Kelpius was his own interest in stuff that we would now recognize as like paranormal, and some of the ways that sort of stuff has become kind of his legacy in American literature and culture. And so yeah, that's sort of like my research background. It's a bunch of stuff that it takes a long time to explain how it all fits together, basically. Yeah.
Something that you said that interests me is that your family didn't grow up super religious. So when you're telling them that like this is like the career path that you wanted to go into, was there a reaction like, now what is going on?
Yeah, I should stress my family actually is religious, and this is hard to describe, but it's just not a big deal.
Yeah.
And so, like for example, when I was in high school, one of my best friends would come over to my house after school every day so he could read the Harry Potter books because his parents wouldn't let him read the Harry Potter books for religious reasons. And at the time, I found this very difficult to understand and really frustrating because my friend was at my house and he didn't want to hang out with me.
Just wanted to read Harry
Yeah.
Potter.
But whereas like my family was religious, but it was not a big deal. Right.
Mm.
And it was just sort of understood that like in the same way that it was just, I was just kind of like almost with everything growing up, my family was there to help me and to like care for me and love me. But it was sort of a given that like I would figure stuff out on my own. And that included like religious stuff. Like we would go to church, and we went to church every week
Yeah.
as I was a kid. but it was just not a big
Good
deal.
deal.
Yeah. And so I you know, it wasn't like I was rebelling by being interested in religion or anything like that, but it was something that was always a part of my life, but just in a different way from a lot of my peers. But from my own work, I was once I got to Texas, weirdly, I became more and more interested in the religious history of Pennsylvania because I was learning a lot about the religious history of America generally. And I kept noticing that places that were local to me where I grew up were really, really important in American religious history. Places in Pennsylvania like Philadelphia, places like Ephrata, Lancaster, all of these places. And part of the reason this is because Pennsylvania at the time of sort of like colonization and settlement was one of a very small number of places in the world where they had what we would now call freedom of religion, right? But what this actually meant in practice was there was a very small number of places where the state would not kill you for believing something weird. And now, luckily we can kind of take this for granted, but this was actually a pretty unusual situation historically. And so what made Pennsylvania so interesting and honestly kind of strange was that it was this place where people of all kinds of radical religious backgrounds can go. And so all of these radical religious figures come to Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is kind of like home base for radical Christians, basically, in the 17th and 18th centuries. And originally, I had an idea to think about. I actually had 4 people in mind that I was going to write about. And I thought the dissertation would be about those 4 people. But as I was working on this project, one of those 4 people kept becoming more and more important and special to me. And then this was Johannes Kelpius, the person who my book is about. And then eventually the thing that kind of firmly convinced me that my dissertation had to be about Kelpius was I studied this novel by an American author named Charles Brockton Brown called Wieland. And it's a really, really interesting, weird novel. And some people think it's the first American novel because it's the first novel written by an American author, a person born and raised in America. But I realized that Wieland was actually about the legacy of Johannes Kelpius, that like the first American novel is about this guy. And a whole bunch of things just sort of clicked where I realized like Kelpius is important in ways that I didn't understand and like no one really understands. And so at that point, I made the decision that I was just going to write about Kelpius. And that's kind of what happened. So, I described these really, really wide kind of interests that I had. And the Kelpius book is like one kind of expression of those interests, or sort of like one big project that luckily got me a PhD and a book came out of it. But yeah, so that's sort of how it all kind of came together into a book.
What were the struggles and problems you faced while writing this book?
It was hard. Well, the first struggles was I immediately had to learn 2 languages. And so
Languages.
German and Latin. So yeah. So luckily I literally took German classes with undergrads at Rice for like 3 years. And that was a lot of fun. I had great German teachers. I honestly had a lot of fun. Just, I liked being in language classes. I liked learning with other people. For Latin, I had to teach myself mostly. And then once I got pretty good at it, I asked if I could join the religion department at Rice had a medieval Latin reading group where we would get together and we would read medieval Latin religious texts. And it was honestly an awesome group because all of the people who were in the group were really interested in like weirdo religious stuff. So we would translate a lot of like basically medieval magical texts together. And it was really hard for me to get in. I had to get pretty good at Latin because they were like professional translators. And even when I got in, I still wasn't very good. And the kind of like running joke in the Latin group is the way we would translate is we would trade off sentence by sentence. And they called them Timbits. So they would say like if the sentence was very short, they would say that's a Timbit, meaning let's save that for Tim's because it's like easy. But but yeah, so I was part of the medieval Latin group for like 2 years, I guess, and they were really, and the other huge help for me there was when it actually came time for me to translate Kelpius's Latin writings, they were there to help, and they honestly did a lot of that work. Like it wasn't just it really was like an awesome community of learners where it wasn't just like I translated and then I asked for help, but like they did a huge amount of that work. And so in my acknowledgments, there's like a whole paragraph about how like a huge part of this book would not have been possible without like these 5 people. And so that was a huge challenge. The other challenge was I started writing in June of 2020. And then, of course, 2020 happened.
Mhm.
And so I had all these plans to travel to Europe to do archival research and to do all these other things. And that just did not happen.
Yeah.
Right. And it ended up being, of course, I hate to describe the pandemic as a blessing in disguise, and it was horrible for everyone. But the one good outcome was I had like a year of my life where there was truly nothing to do but sit on my couch and write this book.
Yeah.
And so that kind of worked out.
Yeah.
I ended up, it ended up not being terrible. Um, but yeah, so there were definitely challenges, and there were so many little like hiccups along the road. Like a lot of times when you're trying to write a book like this, you have this point you're trying to make, or like hypothesis or idea about how these things should fit together. And then you find like a textual source or something in the actual historical record which makes that not work, and you have to go back to the drawing board. That happened. But also the opposite happened too, where you have an idea, you have this hypothesis, you have this idea of how things fit together, and then you find something that confirms it, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm on the money. Like this is kind of, I'm on the right track,
Mhm.
basically. So yeah, I think, both of those things happen all the time. Um, the really hardest part of writing is just waking up and doing it every day.
Mhm.
There's, especially when like, there's always something better to do, basically. And so that's the hardest part, really, is just doing it every day.
Something I think that is interesting is that you brought up community, and we do these podcasts for the radio just so um the New Wilmington community can hear about what's going on around them. And how special was it to have this community of, like you said, your medieval Latin mystical group?
Yeah,
That's so fun. Like,
yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah. It was fun.
And then just like your friends and your family have to support you. Like, how special was that?
Honestly, it's like it's kind of the most important thing. Like you know, writing anything can be like is a super solitary, isolating task, right? But the reason I'm interested in religion is because I just love people. I really think human beings are super interesting, and I just want to learn about human beings all the time, right? I just want to like watch human beings run around. Um, but the reason for like the actual research is I want people to hear me. You know what I mean? I write a book so people will read it, and I I want to hear from them too. I want to be like in a conversation and to be in an exchange. And to me, the only thing that makes like learning of any kind, whether it's like writing or research or teaching or translating, worthwhile, is that you do it in like a group, and it's something that you actually do together. There aren't that many things that are fun to do by yourself, research, writing, and stuff included, right? It really only makes sense when it's part of something that, at least for me, I'll bet there are people who disagree with me, right? But um, yeah, for me, the thing that is like most important is kind of like this stuff kind of connects me with other people and connects me with the world that I'm actually in. And so, yeah, it's really the most important thing, kind of.
And how does all of this tie back into what you teach in the classroom here at Westminster?
It does all the time. Like I teach obviously really broadly. I teach all of the world religions and philosophy classes, so it's super broad. But I'm able to tie it back in pretty often, and it's sort of two sides of one coin. Sometimes when I'm teaching stuff which is as new to me as it is to my students. So, for example, you know, in I taught ancient philosophy last year, and I had read most of that stuff before, and I had some familiarity with it. But I'm certainly not an expert in it. And I was really like learning it, like I was reading books in a room with students and learning it kind of alongside them. And that was really cool. And sometimes I have a chance to really kind of deep dive into stuff that I know a lot specifically about. And that's fun too. And so, but of course it can be harder to like take students along for that stuff because it's so specialized. But it 100% kind of helps me teaching, because I think my biggest goal as a teacher is to, I guess, to try to like model some curiosity and interest and enthusiasm for like the world and the people in it. And like you might, and I'm sure this isn't true for you, Vivian, but you might not remember all the answers to like the midterm in Intro to World Religions, right? But like hopefully the thing you actually walk away with is just a little bit of like interest in those traditions, and also an awareness that people who seem really, really different from you are actually just like you in the important ways, right? And also like you can relate to them, and you can go up and talk to them and tell them a joke, or have a meal together, or any of that other stuff, right?
What has been your proudest moment during your process of research and even just like teaching at Westminster?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I have a single proudest moment, but I get to look at student evaluations when people take my classes, and an evaluation that I get sometimes that makes me feel really, really good is something to the effect of sort of what you said. Like, I didn't know what this class was going to be like, and I was a little bit maybe worried about it, or I didn't think it would be worthwhile or anything, but it was really worthwhile, and I really liked it. And that, I think, is like would be something that I'm kind of like the most proud of, that sort of thing. Just sort of making someone feel like their time with me in a classroom wasn't wasted, and hopefully that they can like carry some of the stuff they've learned forward into the future and into their own lives. Because I do really think that, you don't necessarily need to memorize the 5 pillars of Islam to be like a well-rounded person, but having a little bit of just like ability to kind of relate to people who are different from you, that's kind of the most important thing. And that really is a skill that hopefully people who walk out of the classes kind of have. Yeah.
So what is your next goal?
Whoa, good
Or what's
question.
next?
Yeah. I do have a couple books I'm working on. One of them is about a place in Texas called the Big Thicket. And I won't get too into it because it would take me a long time to try to describe. But so that's kind of my big thing right now. I've got a few other writing projects that I'm working on. I think, my next goal is always to like do a good job at the next class I have to teach. That's actually my next goal. But yeah, I think, my next goal would be I would really love to write a book that would be for a more general audience, because I really like the book that I did write, but it is like a specialist academic book that's written for a very small community of scholars. I would like to write a book that maybe lots of people would want to read, and I would love to hopefully keep getting better as a teacher. I think those are the 2 big ones.
Those are great goals.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Grieve-Carlson. I had such a fun time just learning more about you and your research, because you're very interesting
Oh, thanks.
person, and it's just amazing. Like always, this episode will be saved on WCN247.com under the video and podcast tabs. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again, Dr. Grieve-Carlson.
Thanks so much, Vivian. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.
This has been Roundtable, a community-focused initiative of Titan Radio and produced by the faculty and students of the Broadcast Communications program at Westminster College. You're an important part of this dialogue. Send us your thoughts on this show or ideas for future shows by calling our newsline at 724-946-6397. Send us a direct comment using the shout-out feature on the free Titan Radio mobile app. Email us at titanradio@westminster.edu, or drop us a comment on our Facebook, Twitter, X, or Instagram pages. Join us again next week for Roundtable here on Titan Radio and TitanRadioLive.com.